Hey, y'all. Glad that you could join me again for this week's All Hands on Tech Live. We are building a teleprompter desktop app using Node.js and Electron. Well, we're using Electron, which uses Node.js and Chromium and other web technologies to build a desktop app. Um, If you're joining me for the first time, welcome. If you're returning from last week, wow, I'm super stoked that you would return. If so, give me give me an indication in the comments that you are returning. That would be so cool. Um, I'm just getting back into this whole streaming thing, so still got some kinks to work out and some things to figure out. Um, I am I need to check to make sure all the streams are up everywhere. Let me do that real quick. Looks like we're live on YouTube and Facebook. Let's see. Looks like cool. LinkedIn has decided to cooperate, and Twitch is going. So looks like all things are going. Fernanda, thank you for joining. Glad you could join on LinkedIn. So the purpose of this developer stream series that I'm hosting with All Hands on Tech is to teach a little bit about Electron and Node.js through building a desktop teleprompter application. So a teleprompter is me or anyone who uses a camera and has a screen that reflects up on in front of the camera so that you can see maybe a script as you're recording a video or you're doing a live an event. I use a teleprompter. You can see it in action here. I use a teleprompter so that um, as I'm speaking, I'm looking directly at the camera and I can see a preview of what's on my screen below. I can see it up here. So if I have a script running, I'm recording a video, I can continue to look straight into the camera as I'm speaking without having to look off to the side or look down at my notes or anything like that. It's really awesome if you're doing um, a Zoom call or recording a video for YouTube or social media or for doing training and you want to try to appear a little more professional. Like I love being able to memorize scripts and being able to speak on the fly about things. That's what I certainly try to achieve when I give talks at conferences and user groups and meetups. Is I want to be able to speak naturally, but a script does come in handy. At least some notes or bullet points, or if you're doing an interview with one or more people over Zoom or some other video conferencing, it's nice to have like your your prompts available so that you can ask the right questions at the right time, as you may have kind of coordinated with your speakers, your hosts, or your guests that you have on your video. So this is my setup. I have a microphone up here and a camera here, and my computer's in front of me, and I've got all those shared so that I can do the kind of work that I do, and I want to share what I've learned so far. Uh, Welcome, Rohit. Welcome, Brenda. Yes, nice, nice shoes. I've got a well, over this shoulder, I've got a custom pair of Nike Air Force Ones that Pluralsight uh, gave my team, which was really awesome. And thank you, Cameron. I I wore the beard especially for you today. Hello, Francis. Thank you for joining. Okay, so last week, if you're joining for the first time, last week I got the project started with building a teleprompter app using Electron. And to give you a quick recap of what we've done so far, that is, I'll switch to my shared screen here. We've got Visual Studio Code is what I'm using. It's my favorite editor. It's been my favorite editor for quite a while now. Love it for building Node.js web apps, Electron apps. I've even used it with .NET and C Sharp, and um, and it works great. So we have a project folder created with with at the prompt. We used npm init to create a package JSON file. That command is used to kind of start a Node.js based project, and Electron is a Node based project or technology. And if you're joining for the first time, the we need to make sure that we have some recent version of Node installed, a recent version of npm. So I've got the latest version of Node 16, which is the what is referred to as LTS or long-term support, and I've got npm -v. I've got npm version 8.13 installed. If you don't already have those installed, if you have um, if you're running on Mac or Linux, or you're using the Linux subsystem on Windows, I highly recommend that you install MVM, which is the Node version manager. And this allows you to install multiple versions of Node and have those available on your system that you can switch back and forth. So I have version 16 and version 18 installed, and you can go back, you know, many versions. Most of these versions are no longer supported, as in, the Node.js community is no longer updating those for purposes of like security updates. But any of the LTS versions, um, which I think include 16 and 14, uh, those are definitely current. So you need one of those to be able to build and run the code that we're developing. And the command that you just saw me do, as I mentioned before, I use Visual Studio Code, and I was able to go to the folder where my project is and type in code space period, and that launched Visual Studio Code. I already had it open, but I wanted to demonstrate that command, which I think is super helpful. If you do any work at the command line at all, and you want to open up Visual Studio Code in whatever your current folder is, the way you accomplish that is when after you install Visual Studio Code, you have to enable the command line interface. And you can do that inside Visual Studio Code by doing Control-Shift-P, which is your command palette, or you can go to, it's been so long since I used the menu for it. It's under View. You click on Command Palette, and inside the Command Palette, if you start typing command, you'll see that there is a install code in your command path. And so whatever operating system you're on, it registers code as that in your environment so that you can type code at the command line and launch Visual Studio Code and be able to provide a path or a relative path to whatever folder or file that you want to open. So, little tip for you there. Inside the project so far, again, just recapping what we did last week. There's a package JSON file that includes the name and description. There's a main, which is like the entry point for your application. We've got that set to the source folder / main.js. We've got a start command defined in our scripts that runs the Electron executable. And then we've got a few dev dependencies installed. I've got Electron installed, and then my go-to for any JavaScript or Node.js project, I've got ESLint and my personal ESLint config Reverend Geek. And I've got what goes along with that ESLint configuration is you need an ESLint configuration file, and I've got mine set up here with my rules for Node.js, and that is going to, alert me if I'm doing some syntax silliness, or it's going to help me with making all my formatting consistent and so forth. All right. Thank you for joining on LinkedIn. And yes, if anyone is enjoying working remote and continuing to work remotely, I work remote. I've been doing it for years. I love being able to do technology. I mean, that's one of the benefits, the beauties of being in technology, is being able to essentially work just about anywhere you can get an internet connection. Sometimes even working without an internet connection, as long as you can sync up somewhere at some point. Let's see. So I've got a source folder that contains a main.js, and here is where we bootstrap the application. We've got we're pulling in some dependencies at the top, a couple of objects off of Electron, which is the app in the browser window, and we're using the built-in path library that comes with Node.js. We've got a create window function that creates a new desktop window, which in our case is it's called a browser window, but it's like an instance of Chrome. Now, to any user who is using your application, they don't necessarily, they would never realize that it's a browser-based application unless you make it look like a browser-based application. So if you use things like Slack or Visual Studio Code, and I'm trying to think of GitHub Desktop, there are lots and lots of applications that you may use on a regular basis that were built with Electron. I think it's pretty amazing technology, especially with my background being in building web apps. I'm much more familiar and comfortable building interfaces and working with code that deals with HTML and CSS and JavaScript than I am with building something with, say, C#, which is quite a challenge if you want to be able to build a desktop app that will run on all platforms. You can use Xamarin to create a cross-platform desktop app that will run on Mac and Linux as well as Windows. But my experience, which is you know, I have to admit, I haven't tried in quite some time, but my experience in the past was it was pretty difficult to get that to work. Whereas Electron, using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you can run the exact same application on any platform, and it looks exactly the same on each one and behaves the same, which is, as I mentioned before, Visual Studio Code is an Electron application, and it's amazing technology. Okay, so we got this create window function that loads up a new window, and we're setting the height and width, and we're centering the app on the screen, and we've got some things like our we were just getting into last time this preload of teleprompter preload.js. I don't think we have anything in there yet. No, it's still empty. And we've got some properties like transparent true and frame false. I'm going to set both of these to false. And then after you create the window, you load an HTML file into that window, and we've got it pointing at this teleprompter.html, which is just some dummy text right now. We've got one div in here with some text. Hey, y'all, how's it going? So let's go ahead and run this to make sure that everything is still working like we expect. So we can use npm space start, which is telling npm to run the start script inside the package JSON. So there's actually more than one way we could do this. We could run npm start, or we can use the npx command and use Electron, it's equivalent syntax. And npx is like a package executor. It's going to run that from the command line, just like it would a script inside package JSON. And it's going to first look to see if that dependency is already installed. If not, it's going to, ask if it's okay to download that dependency and execute it. So npm start. And there we go. There's our application window. Now, it may be hard to see what that says, but it's a very faint gray background with white text that says, "Hey, y'all, how's it going?" Let me come over here and update the CSS. I'm going to change the color to something else right for a moment, just so that you can see that text. Now, what I just did was I used the command shortcut Command R, or on it's the same command that you would use to refresh your browser. So this is a cool thing. If you're building an Electron application, you can use the same commands that you would use in your internet browser to, without having to close and relaunch the application. If you're making changes to now, the caveat, this is only works if you're making changes to the front end of your application, meaning the HTML and the CSS and the front end JavaScript code. If you make any changes to the Node.js code, like that we found in main.js, then you have to close the application and relaunch it. But Command R will refresh the page, and you can see, you can see that text and what's going on. I'm going to minimize these other things so that maybe you'll see when I come over here and change this back, maybe there'll be enough contrast that you can see that. Yeah, it's still probably still too light. Let's do this. I'm going to um, close the application. Go in here to main.js, and I'm going to change transparent to true and leave frame false. Now you can probably see that there's a faint gray box with the text, "Hey y'all, how's it going?" Especially if there's a darker background. And this is essentially what we want to accomplish with a teleprompt application. We want whatever it is that we're using on our desktop screen, we want to overlay some text on top of that so that we can still see what's behind it. Say if we're on a video conference call and we're looking, at our camera through the teleprompter, we want to see our script or our questions or prompts or whatever that we're using and be able to see the video so that we can look directly at the people that we're talking to. Kent asked the question, what's the VS Code theme that I'm using? That's a great question, and I'm intentionally using a white, you know, dark themes have been the craze now for quite some time, and I was on the dark theme bandwagon for a while, and there's another theme that's kind of in between white and dark that I like, um, that I use personally, but for things like tutorials and videos, and if I'm showing code live at a conference or an event, I my personal opinion is that um, white backgrounds are still have higher contrast and look better or easier to read as someone who is watching a video or watching a presentation. So, great, um, great question. And the theme that I am using, if I bring up the command palette and look at the color theme, I am using GitHub Lite. And I'm also using my favorite font for coding is the Jetbrains Mono font. And I've gone through in my in my long career as a software developer, I have used lots and lots of different fonts. I was when JetBrains came out with their own version of the mono font, it seemed to hit that sweet spot of ligatures and nice formatting on different characters and numbers. I just felt like the perfect font for me. On While we're talking about fonts and themes and things like that, if you're interested, I use iTerm. Of course, I'm running on a Mac right now. I have Windows PCs and I've worked on Windows for a lot of my career. So I'm very comfortable there too. But on the Mac, I use iTerm 2. And the theme that I am using, let's see if I can find that. I've created a white background profile that also uses, um, I've got this theme that I downloaded from iTerm called Alabaster that seems to have a nice contrast of colors with a white background. And for text, I am using, again, the Jetbrains mono with ligatures enabled and anti-aliased. The ligatures are nice because you can get some cool things um, at the command line, like these some of these arrows and things like that. I'm also using spaceship prompt to um, give me some context in my terminal. Like I'm using my project is version 1.1. I'm using Node 16.15.1, and the last command took 2 minutes and 37 seconds. So some cool things fun things you can do with the command prompt inside iTerm. And of course, you can install all these same kinds of things on the Windows, the Linux subsystem for Windows. I think that's fantastic. So you can have the best of both worlds. If you're a Windows user, you can still have all your Windows apps and things that you like, but also have some pretty cool terminal experiences with the Linux subsystem. All right. Thanks for the question, Kent, and thanks for the Bob Ross um, uh, uh, you know, similarity there. That is the vibe that I try to go for. Uh, I want to make teaching technology fun and happy. Let's uh let's paint some happy code right over here. All right, so we're now back up to where we finished last time. Let's continue down the path of what is this all about? The teleprompter preload. This is a way to hook into the application life cycle and still have it it's a little cumbersome, I got to admit, but it's kind of trying to give you the security of having a completely sandboxed environment, meaning this window, when it after it loads, I'm talking about this, hey y'all, how's it going? This window, once it loads, it has zero permissions to directly change anything on your computer. It doesn't have access to the file system. It cannot run any arbitrary Node.js code. It is as limited to its capability as your desktop browser. So your desktop browser is a sandbox environment so that no malicious code can be loaded and and take over your computer. That's a really good thing. The so the prompt or this preload is a way of kind of initializing your application window so that it can have the opportunity to do some things in a very strict way. You know, you have control over that as the developer. People who are using the application don't have direct control over this. You have the ability to run some Node.js based code, which does have access to the file system and can execute lots of Node.js modules and Node.js libraries that are built in to Node, and then set up a kind of application specific framework that you can use to make requests to your backend. If you think of an Electron application is two parts. It's Node.js as your bootstrap, and then the Node.js app launches one or more Chrome instances of Chromium to create the user interface. And those are two separate processes, two separate threads. But there is a interprocess communications way of sending messages from one to the other. So if your window needs to be able to do something that's related to the file system, or to like show a native dialog box like print, or a file open, file save, those kinds of things need to happen on the Node.js part, which is called the main process. And the window needs to be able to communicate to the main process to say, I need you to do this thing. And the main process can do that action and then send a message back to the window to say, I'm done. Here's the result. All right. So I'm going to show you what kind of code we're going to create in this preload. We need some stuff off of the Electron framework. Specifically, as I talked about, there being an inter-process communications, a way of sending messages back and forth. That happens with Ipc main and Ipc renderer. The difference is Ipc main is designed to be used on the main process, which happens inside. In our case, it's called main.js. It doesn't have to be called main.js, but to kind of align with the terminology that Electron uses, we're using main.js as our entry point for the application. So Ipc main is used in main. Ipc renderer is designed to be used in the browser window, which in Electron terminology is called a renderer. Try to say that 5 times. So we have Ipc renderer. So that what we want to accomplish with this teleprompter preload is I want to be able to load in a text file to be the contents of the application. Instead of me, I could, as the person who is developing this application, I could edit the source code, I could edit the HTML directly and put in whatever content that I want. I could make it work as is. But long term, I want to make this an application that other people can use, that I can just give them a packaged version of the application, and they could choose at runtime what script to load. Or somewhere down the road, we may even want to go as far as creating an editor inside the application that would allow somebody to edit a script. I think that's definitely a goal we should have in building this application. So Ipc Renderer is used to communicate with the main process, so to tell it to load some stuff or um, send messages back and forth. I'm going to use the same path library from Node. And there's a couple of things that I want to bring in that we need to have in this file. A couple of other dependencies. One is Node has a built-in file system library that's you can use to read and write files. But there's a open source library for Node that I really like because it adds a lot of nice capabilities and some shortcuts. It makes working with files a little bit easier. And that's called FS Extra. I'm going to close the application and npm install FS Extra. And now we can bring that in as a dependency. And I want to create a function called an async function called get content. For now, we're going to look in the same folder that our client text is. Later on, we'll want to refactor this to be able to load whatever file may be passed to this function, maybe through a file open dialog in Electron. But for now, we're just going to look at a specific content.text, or maybe let's call this content.html. Later on, I want to refactor this again to use Markdown. I love Markdown. I hope you like it too, because that's what I ultimately am going to use to write my scripts. Markdown is, typically this very terse syntax that can be compiled or transpiled from Markdown format to HTML, which, is perfect because we're building an Electron application and ultimately, we do need everything to be HTML. For grins, I'm going to, let's bring the content in using await fs.read file. And we'll use file name and specify an encoding of UTF-8. And let's log the content of that, just so that we have, there's our there's our debugging. And return the content. Oh, wait. We can't just return the content. Well, let's do that. We're also, because we're in this kind of in-between environment of it's Node.js, but it's also a web browser, we have access to both. We have access to the Node.js libraries and node packages and all this great stuff at our disposal, we also have access to the renderer, which is our browser window. And just like we can inside JavaScript for the browser, we can add an event listener. And in here, we're going to look for the DOM content loaded event, which is like, your jQuery document ready event, or, it's the kind of the standard now for everything's ready to go. Let's now we can do some meaningful stuff with the HTML that has been set up. So our event listener is going to, we're going to put a try catch in here. And use the Ipc Renderer to send the error message over a channel called error. I'll get more into that in a moment. We'll set up the other side of it, the other endpoint inside of the main.js in just a moment. For now, we'll say const content, or let's say HTML equals await get content, and we'll find an element on the page using document dot get element by ID, and we're going to look for the ID of MD, and just to tell you again, this is, so we have this, hey y'all, how's it going? But it's got the div has an ID of MD. So with that element, not that we really need to, but we're going to say if element, which should always be there because we have control over this. So, but just because we can, or we ought to, if element, then el.inner HTML equals HTML. Kent, I'm glad to hear that you are also in Team Markdown. Oh, one thing we should do. So I'm getting these squiggly lines for window and document. That's my ESLint at work. Right now, my ESLint is set up to be, it has Node.js rules. And inside Node.js, we don't normally have a window or a document global, top level object that we can access directly. So I need to tell ESLint that inside this client folder only, that the content that's in here is a browser type content. So I'm going to create a new file, which is also a ESLint RC JavaScript file. And a tip that I shared on my last session is if you're ever like hey, I need to use this module, but I don't remember how to use the syntax, or I need some help with it. You know, a quick way of getting to that help without having to go to your browser and search for it is you can use npm docs followed by the package name, and it will launch if there is a documentation link provided in that package. It will launch the documentation for that, which is super cool and helpful. So I have a browser rule set that I need to put into here. I want to have both because the preload is a mix. So I'm going to also include Node. And it's just it's like an array of the libraries or ESLint configuration files um, to load for this particular folder. So now, looking at the preload file, I no longer get a warning around using window and document. Um, and we don't have to use the strict anymore. Um, I'm going to leave it in there just because uh, I prefer it, but it's not necessary according to the lint rules. Let's see. You know what? I don't want to see the warning either. Change my mind. We can do that. And before I forget, I set up this Ipc renderer to send an error message over this to this channel, channel named error. I want to show you how to set up the endpoint for that on main. So main needs to have the the other end registered. We're going to need the Ipc main module that's on this there. And inside our app when ready, we can set up our channel. We're going to say Ipc main on error, which is the name of the event. We have event and args. And we're just going to log that for now to the console. I think that's all. Now we need to create our HTML, our content file. So preload, the name of the file is content.html. Let's create a new file here, content.html. Inside here, we'll say prompt 1, an unordered list. See, talking point 1, 2, and 3. And hopefully, when we run this app now, instead of seeing, hey y'all, how's it going? We'll see that this gets replaced with the text, the content that we have here. And this is kind of again, the first step towards the goal of eventually us being able to load practically any HTML or eventually markdown file and have that be displayed inside the prompt. So let's try npm start. And just to make sure you can see it, I'll hide everything else. And looky there, it worked. Let me get rid of this window. Cool. Now, another cool tip about building apps with Electron. It is an instance of Chromium that is doing the rendering. So you could think of it as like a light version of Chrome that you have running here. One of the benefits that we have of using this is we have, if I can remember the command, I can't remember the command. On the Mac, it's Option Command I. We can toggle the developer tools. So Command Option I. Nope, that didn't work. There we go. So if you do any web development, you are probably familiar with the developer tools that come with Chrome that give you like inspections. Our window is no longer transparent, so the text may be hard to read. Let's fix that. We can edit the the CSS directly. Look at there. We can change the color of the CSS. You can see our markdown, our MD object, and there's the HTML that was loaded into this window from the other file. Very, very cool. So next step, let's answer any questions. So we only have if I'm going to keep these developer sessions to an hour each week, we've only got 7 minutes before the hour's up. We could probably tackle working with Markdown, but if you have any questions, now would be a great time to ask them. One thing to note is there was a CSS thing that I did last week where if I click anywhere in the window, it acts like I'm clicking the window Chrome or the header for the window, but we don't have one. We don't have a window top menu bar to grab a hold of. So we were able to accomplish this using some clever CSS. And that CSS is right here. WebKit app region drag. So if I click anywhere inside the content element, it's going to allow me to drag the window. And since I have the height set to 100 and all this good stuff, then that element should be taking up, you know, the entire application. Also, you can see that I can use scrolling to move the text up and down. This will definitely come in handy later on when we have a script that is, potentially multiple pages or multiple screens worth of content. We can either scroll manually using our mouse or trackpad or whatever, but to give you a sneak peek at what we're going to do in the future, one of the things that I want to accomplish is using a clicker. So, like if you're giving a presentation, say I'm talking to you, I don't want to reach over and grab a mouse or anything like that. I can have a clicker held in my hand the whole time, and I can just click to the next group of content in my script as I'm speaking. So we're going to do some clever HTML and use anchor tags and some JavaScript to be able to jump from one anchor to another using a clicker. Because a clicker, in case you didn't know, is essentially a very, very limited keyboard. And the clicker is sending to your computer an arrow right or arrow left or a few other keyboard commands. And so we can use those commands, or we can listen for those keyboard commands inside JavaScript to be able to jump from one part of the HTML to another. All right. Well, I'm not going to go any further with the coding today. Still going to leave the stream running for a couple more minutes. If you have any questions or anything, please pop them in the chat wherever you are. I'm enjoying this. I hope you are too. I haven't done streaming and this kind of thing for a while, so it's fun to get back into it, and I hope to get into a regular cadence. So for the time being, this is going to be an every week thing. Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern to 11 a.m. Pacific, and whatever points in between. Thank you for everyone who's joined. Have a great afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining, and hope to see you again on the next one. Oh, we do have one question from Kent. Notice you sent the error object and it's listed as error. What was that an object you defined or native type? Good question. So, in the client, we named the object that is caught error. And we are sending that same JavaScript error object to I gotta show you my screen. I was sitting here talking about my screen. I didn't share it. So we catch the error, and we could name this whatever we want to, and then we're sending it to the endpoint over IPC. I called the channel error as well, but we don't have to. We could call this arbitrary messages. That'll be the name of our channel. We just need to make sure on the other side where main is listening that we also call the channel the same thing. So when IPC main receives a message on this channel named arbitrary messages, it's going to log the event and the arguments that are sent to the console. So in this way, we can wire up a error messages that happened on the client side to also spit out in the terminal window. That way, we may not always have that that debug, the developer tools open for Chrome, so we may not see messages that are getting logged to the console in the browser. But if we're also sending those same error messages and things to the main process that gets spit out onto the terminal window, then we're more likely to see those messages there. And again, it's an example of we can do lots more with IPC to send commands back and forth or send messages back and forth between the renderer, which is the Chrome window, and the main process. Hope that clears it up for you. And thank you again for joining, and I will see you next week on the next stream.